Wavelength.
Just because we're doing our lectures online doesn't mean that we need to then retreat and make life, all about being alone.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide.
I think there's not enough knowledge around the severity of the long-term impacts that a concussion can give you, and it's not really educated enough.
You should be having.
The minimum job search requirements is definitely problematic, and it is up to a computer to decide whether you receive your payments each month.
This is Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I am your host, Cass, and tonight I am in the studio alone. It is very, very quiet without Maggie, but don't worry, she'll be back next episode. Before we jump in, we do need to acknowledge that we are recording Wavelength on the land of the Kaurna people of the Adelaide Plains and pay respect to elders past and present. We recognise and respect their cultural heritage, beliefs and relationship with the land. We acknowledge that there are continuing importance to the Kaurna people living today, and we also extend that respect to other Aboriginal language groups and other First Nations. It is very lonely in the studio tonight, so please get involved in the show. You can text in on 0428 927 927 to share your thoughts on your stories, or just tell me how you're going, how your week has been. Have you been overwhelmed? Have you been good? I want to hear it all. Anyway, let's jump right into the episode. Tonight, we are talking to Ray Hodge, a business expert, about difficult employees and employers and how to handle hard situations in the office. Then later on, our newest recruit, Kayla, talks you through slow fashion on Wavelength Explains, and I give you all the good news that has happened this week. But right now, one of our newest journalists, Ella, speaks with Dr. Alicia Macro about Women's Health Week and endometriosis. Ella, take it away.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Could you briefly explain what endometriosis is and some of the symptoms impacting young women?
To talk about endometriosis, we've got to talk about periods first. So endometriosis is a condition that happens to people who have periods, predominantly women, and instead of that period flow going down and out during a period, some of that flow goes out and up onto the fallopian tubes, onto the ovaries and into the abdominal cavity. And that period flow is not just blood. So there's actual active tissue in there. So what happens is that active tissue adheres to those other structures where it shouldn't be. It bleeds, it causes inflammation, and it causes pain. And that is where women with endometriosis find themselves having all sorts of horrible symptoms. So symptoms can be heavy periods, painful periods, there can be pelvic pain, there can be bloating, there can be fatigue, there can be problems with the bowels, there can be problems with the bladder, and there can be problems with intercourse as well.
Currently, the average diagnosis takes roughly 6.5 years. What makes this such a lengthy process?
Look, I think that historically there's been two tricky parts to diagnosing endometriosis. The first one's been this sort of traditional view that periods are often painful and disabling for women and that's normal, and that's just not true. It's taken a long time for my medical colleagues and even just women in general to realise that periods shouldn't be disabling for women every month. The second problem is that traditionally, to be diagnosed, you have to have surgery. And really, what we need to be doing is actually identifying those period problems early on and recognising the likelihood that that's endometriosis and getting in and explaining and treating.
How will the new clinic aid South Australian women who are suffering from endometriosis or pelvic pain?
We're the first clinic in Adelaide. There's also another clinic in Kaduna, but we're the first clinic in Adelaide to be offered some funding to really help tackle the problem of endometriosis. I have heard that the plan is for there to be more clinics open as well. Endometriosis affects 1 in 9 women, so that's a lot of women looking for help. What we do here is we're able to have a bunch of GPs. We're actually all female GPs, which I think helps. Men are good at this too, but I think often women are more comfortable speaking to a female practitioner, that we can see women and we can identify their issues, help them to understand what's happening and look at all sorts of different ways that we can manage their problem with endometriosis. So yes, medication and surgery sometimes have a role, but there's loads of other things that can be done to help all of the symptoms with endometriosis, starting with education and understanding, but there's also a role for a dietitian, there's also a role for physiotherapy, there's a role for exercise physiology and even psychology.
What steps do you think can be taken by the federal government or state governments to ensure better access to care and treatment pathways?
Funding is super important. That's the first thing. Actually providing funding for extended consultation with general practitioners and better funding for allied health as well. Second thing is helping to raise awareness. So there's actually some great programs already, but further funding those would be great. There's the Pelvic Pain Foundation that goes and does its PEP talk, which is a periods and women's health talk for high school kids, but more education, more awareness and better access to coordinated interdisciplinary care is really going to be the key to managing endometriosis.
What would you say are the best avenues moving forward for educating young women on the symptoms and risks of endometriosis?
Yeah, look, I think having access to really good period education in school is going to be really important. Making sure not just girls but boys have that opportunity to understand and get their head around periods, understand what a normal period is, and also understanding all the spectrum of things that can happen when endometriosis happens is going to be really important. And once you can identify what the problem is, it's much easier to start tackling how to help getting it better.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you so much for that, Ella and Dr. Macro. Endometriosis is a really important topic and often overlooked. I know talking about periods can be a little uncomfortable at times, but endometriosis is a very serious disease that affects 1 in 10 Australian women. I have friends with Endo who every month are in crippling pain, and it is so hard to watch. There is also a significant amount of women who are unable to get diagnosed or get help for this disease, which can cause a lot of emotional and physical trauma. So check in with all of the women in your life and make sure that they're feeling extra supported and loved. After the break, we talk hard situations in the workplace. You're listening to Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. I am alone in the studio tonight and it feels a little bit weird and I feel a little bit lonely, but I know that you Fresh fam are here for me and I appreciate it. Message in on 0428 927 927. Keep the conversation going. I also want to hear you guys' thoughts on all of the stories that we are covering tonight. Right now, we are going to be talking to Ray Hodge. He is a business entrepreneur in Adelaide and he is going to be talking about hard situations in the workplace. Jasmine, take it away.
Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ray. Could you please start by introducing yourself?
Yes, so I work with businesses nationally, helping to improve them, and I do a lot of work with managers and business owners in the executive coaching, business leadership development space, just helping leaders have an easier life and manage their teams and their time better.
Would you be able to share an example from your experience where you've had to manage a challenging employee situation in those kind of circumstances? How did you handle it and what ended up being a result of that?
Well, I had an interesting one. I've shared this story quite a bit, is that a client here in Adelaide asked me to help one of his team members, and she was really struggling. She would sit at her desk with her head in her hands, and I supported her for about 6 months, and that head in the hands was serious overwhelm. To credit the business owner, a lot of people would have tried to find a way out for those people.
Yes,
but he asked me to help her, and what it was a series of areas in her personal world and in her work world that over that course of 6 to 9 months, we changed them to make those conditions conducive for her to thrive and to reduce the overwhelm. And so after the 6 to 9 months, pretty much those panic attacks had disappeared and she was back at full work productivity. Her manager actually said she was the least of her problems, his problems after that 6 months. So that was a really cool experience to see that conditions can affect our either thriving or surviving states, and having the right conditions is really important.
Of course, in saying that, empathy plays a crucial role in leadership and managerial positions. How do you cultivate and demonstrate that empathy in your interactions with employees, especially when dealing with difficult situations?
Well, I think the first thing, there's really three things. The first area is that leaders, it's really important for them to have emotional intelligence or emotional awareness for themselves. So, for example, every morning most mornings I write in my journal, and part of that journaling is writing down how I feel. So I'm tapping into those feelings, and because it's important to note, empathy actually means in feeling or feeling into. So it really starts from a leadership perspective, and the more self-aware and emotionally aware we are, the more we can feel into or get that experience of others. I think the other couple of things is it's important for people to feel heard and not judged.
Yes.
Sometimes people don't want an answer, they want to explore it. And sometimes us sitting with somebody who's struggling, that sitting and being silent is actually the answer that they need. And the last thing is that one of the things I practice and teach others is reversal. So if someone, like a friend of mine, told me about his challenge with heroin addiction and the subsequent loss of work and not wanting to go back to work, I don't understand that. But what I do is seek to say, well, if I was in that situation, gosh, that must be really tricky. Yeah. And just being able to validate that and say, gosh, I've never been there, but that must have been really challenging. People get that sense that you're with them on that journey.
Yeah. In your opinion, what would be the key factors that truly motivate employees? How do you create that environment that fosters the motivation among team members?
That's a great question, and I could talk all day about this. Yeah. Motivation is massive. So I've studied motivation. I'm currently in the process of writing a book about it. Cutting to the chase, I think motivation is a byproduct. It comes out of the right conditions. And I share the story about my roses. I never wish my roses were more motivated to grow. I never wish they, had bigger blooms. I never tell them to harden up, and get their act together. If I provide the right conditions, those babies are motivated to grow. Exactly. And I see it the same for human beings. If we, and this goes back to that woman I spoke about earlier, is that if we provide the right conditions in the workplace and create conditions in our home and personal world that create that inspiration, then motivation is more likely to flourish.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Welcome back to Wavelength. Right now, we're going to be talking through slow fashion. If you're anything like me, you like getting the newest trends and the newest clothes as much as you can, but it's not the most environmentally friendly way to live. Kayla is going to talk you through what slow fashion is and how you can be a part of it.
Wavelength explains on Fresh 92.7.
Slow fashion is a term that you may have seen thrown around on social media recently, especially in the wake of popularity of online stores like Shein and Temu. Many people who are preaching the slow fashion lifestyle are calling out these fast fashion companies for their practices. So, what is slow fashion and why has it gained momentum? Well, slow fashion is an approach to fashion consumption that considers the processes and resources required to make clothing, putting timeless, high-quality designs at the forefront over trend-driven pieces. Basically, the idea is to buy better quality garments that last longer, as well as valuing fair treatment of the workers making the clothes and, of course, the planet along the way. This is the opposite to fast fashion, which includes companies like Zara, H&M, and of course, Shein. These companies pump out tons of clothing daily in factories, creating not just an excess of wasting garments, but also use a huge number of resources both environmental and human, to sustain production. Along with the factory waste, landfills across the globe are overrun with discarded clothes, causing huge amounts of pollution. So what makes a slow fashion company? Garments are made from higher quality, lower impact materials like linen, with designs that rarely go out of fashion. Often they are sold in smaller stores with smaller ranges and less collection releases. They also tend to be locally sourced, produced and sold, along with being made to order. Thrift and op shopping can also come under the slow fashion umbrella, as you are reusing and preventing garments ending up as landfill. Now, there are some criticisms of slow fashion, especially due to accessibility. From sizing to affordability, there are times where it is not possible to shop slow fashion, especially in this current cost of living crisis. Like everything though, the biggest issues with fast fashion do come from overconsumption. That is why if you can afford and have access to slow fashion, it is one way you can help lessen the environmental impact that the clothing industry on a whole is contributing to.
Wavelength.
Welcome back to Wavelength. You're listening on Fresh 92.7. Right now, I'm going to take you through all of the good news that's happened this week.
I know there's gonna be heaps good news on Wavelength.
It is officially my favourite time of the episode where we dedicate a little bit of time to cheer you up. Every time I do this segment, I'm reminded of how many incredible things are happening around Adelaide. If you are an art lover, the Frida and Diego collection, named Love and Revolution, is in full swing at the Art Gallery of South Australia. The collection explores the iconic works by the 20th century Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. Frida has become a feminist icon and is remembered for breaking social conventions. The collection shows over 150 pieces, including paints, photographers, and period attire. But that's not all art lovers. The Art of Banksy collection, called Without Limits, is located in the Maya Centre in Adelaide Frontal Mall and features over 150 of Banksy's works with murals and immersive video mapping installations. Echidna's mating season is upon us. The spiking and adorable animals will go on the hunt for mates this time of year, which means the elusive creatures can be spotted significantly more. While seeing these cute creatures is a treat, scientists have stated to be warned they could be crossing roads or going through backyards and to be careful around them. Finally, yesterday we had the City to Bay Fun Run. The iconic run consists from 3 kilometres to 22 kilometre runs, and a son and a father this year raised over $12,000 for cerebral palsy through September. That is all the time I have for you tonight, but I hope that I've put a little smile on your dial.
Sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
And that brings us to the end of the show tonight. Thank you so much for listening and keeping me company. Make sure you're subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you can get your podcasts. You can listen back to our old episodes right now, and tonight's episode will be up soon. That is officially it from us tonight. Right after us, Deep with Easy G comes into the studio. Keep it on Fresh.